Just days after President Trump publicly called on his attorney general to prosecute his political opponents, one of his longtime adversaries is now under indictment, and the president is signaling more prosecutions could be coming. In an historic development, a federal grand jury indicted former FBI Director James Comey late yesterday in connection with congressional testimony that he gave in September of 2020. In that testimony, Comey told Senator Ted Cruz that he stood by testimony from 2017, denying he authorized a leak of information. Comey now charged with one count of making a false statement and one count of obstruction of a congressional proceeding. He could spend up to 5 years in prison if convicted. Now, Comey denies any wrongdoing, and he's vowing to fight the charges he now faces.
My family and I have known for years that there are costs to standing up to Donald Trump. But we couldn't imagine ourselves living any other way. We will not live on our knees, and you shouldn't either. Somebody that I love dearly recently said that fear is the tool of a tyrant, and she's right. My heart is broken for the Department of Justice, but I have great confidence in the federal judicial system, and I'm innocent. So let's have a trial and keep the faith.
Lindsay Halligan is the new acting U.S. attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia and a former personal attorney for Donald Trump. She's the one that brought the charges against Comey despite some internal division at the DOJ over the substance of the case. A senior DOJ official telling NBC News that career prosecutors sent Halligan a memo expressing their concerns about the lack of evidence in the case. President Trump, meanwhile, is celebrating the news on social media, calling Comey, quote, one of the worst human beings this country has ever been exposed to, saying that he lied. He even called him a dirty cop. The president today was asked about who else was on his list to be prosecuted now that Comey's been indicted. This is what he said.
It's not a list, but I think there'll be others. I mean, they're corrupt. These were corrupt, radical left Democrats, because Comey essentially he was worse than a Democrat. I would say the Democrats are better than Comey. But no, there'll be others. Look, that's my opinion. They weaponized the Justice Department like nobody in history. What they've done is terrible. And so I hope there are others, because you can't let this happen to a country.
Joining me now are NBC News Chief Justice and National Affairs Correspondent Kelly O'Donnell, NBC News White House Correspondent Vaughn Hillyard, and Greg Rosen, a former Assistant U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia and now a professor of law at George Washington. So, Kelly, let's start with you. I mean, this is a kind of a loaded question, but how did we get here?
What a long and twisted journey it has been. This really comes down to the time running out on the Department of Justice based on the information they had where they ultimately decided to bring charges. The events go back 5 years. The statute of limitations would have expired next week. So that's the why now. Mm-hmm. And what's underneath it is also a very vexing set of facts, because James Comey, who was then FBI director, testified that he did not authorize certain leaks. There was a dispute over that. And so the charges against him deal with false statements and obstructing the congressional review. Many people have now seen it. He was testifying from home at that time. He lives in Virginia. That's why the Eastern Virginia District is the venue for this, not Washington, D.C., mm-hmm. which would be the typical thing for a congressional investigation. And this will, of course, challenge whether they have enough evidence, after we now know from our reporting that there were others in the office that did not believe there was sufficient information to bring this indictment. And
it's interesting that you make that point, because the interim U.S. Attorney, Lindsay Halligan, she's the only name that's on this indictment. She's the only signature on this indictment. Does that mean she's going to be the one prosecuting the case? Not yet.
In talking with various authorities, they have not laid that out yet, but it is notable that she was present, that she was the only one present in the grand jury, according to our sources, and that is especially notable when you consider her personal background. She is an attorney. Her legal career included insurance law. She then became a part of President Trump's legal team, and then most recently was in the White House in a role known as the Assistant Staff Secretary. That is not a clerical job. Mm-hmm. It is a legal job where the staff secretary kind of shepherds all paperwork that gets to a president's desk. Bills that he would sign, executive actions, And we know in this White House, that's a busy job.
Yeah, and I don't hear any prosecutorial
None.
experience
None.
in that resume, though. So that is a certain degree curious. Now, the indictment only came after a U.S. attorney resigned under pressure. This was a Trump appointee, too, that resigned to seek charges against Comey, and after a group of career prosecutors wrote this memo to the Justice Department, encouraging them not to seek an indictment. How are the folks inside DOJ responding to this?
Well, part of this is that they have an obligation to believe that if they bring a case that they think it does have the merits, that it will lead to conviction. And so there are ethical obligations there. So it is notable and important that others who reviewed the evidence did not believe it should go forward. And that puts a lot of the pressure on Halligan, who stepped into this role after that abrupt resignation some days ago from Eric Siebert. And she now will have to carry the ball. The question will be, and we're continuing to look at this, and I think it's too early to know, how will they design a prosecutorial plan for this? Because she does not have the prosecution experience that you indicated. And this is going to be a high-profile case, and it will take others to be involved. But in talking to officials today, they said that has not yet been determined.
Okay, a lot on your plate, Kelly. Thank you for all of that. Let's turn to Vaughn now at the White House. Vaughn, prosecutors were up against a deadline here, as Kelly points out, to seek an indictment against James Comey. But he's not the only person who the president has indicated he'd like to prosecute. Could there be more?
Right. If you go back to this weekend when the president expressed displeasure with Attorney General Pam Bondi for the lack of action and the lack of justice, as he sees it, against James Comey, he also mentioned New York Attorney General Letitia James, as well as California Senator, U.S. Senator Adam Schiff, in the same social media post. We know that investigations are underway into both of those individuals, James and Schiff, as it relates to allegations coming out of this administration that they illegally had noted 2 residences being primary residences in mortgage loan applications. But sort of similar here to what we've seen in the James Comey indictment. Much of the president's ire towards James and Schiff are unrelated to the allegations to which they are being explicitly investigated for. Like in this case with James Comey, the president had suggested repeatedly that he was believed that his initiation of the Russia investigation in 2016 was an effort to undermine his presidency. But the actual charges that were brought against James Comey last night, to our understanding, are explicitly more along the lines of the potential authorization of leaks to the media. So this is sort of where the president has called for the political prosecutions, or I should say the prosecutions that many have called political prosecutions of his perceived political enemies, but his Department of Justice finding other routes of investigatory means to go and to potentially try to implicate those very individuals.
And he may already be working the reps here, right, Vaughn? He's lashing out at the judge assigned to this case because that judge was appointed by President Biden. What's he do here? Is he laying out his argument maybe for the case if it's dismissed, or maybe if Comey's even acquitted?
Right. He has set a very high standard for what his expectations are, and he campaigned on this on the campaign trail. He had social media posts with James Comey in an orange jumpsuit. This is for the president. He put a team of Pam Bondi and his Attorney General, Kash Patel at the FBI, individuals who he believed would go after and seek these prosecutions. And you noted that he made mention that the judge assigned to this Comey case is, in fact, a Biden-appointed judge here. Typically, we would not pay so much attention to who appointed which judges, but here, over the last decade, it has become increasingly, you could say, worth noting in some regards. And so this is one in which you have seen the president call into question the integrity of judges based on the appointments of who appointed them. And this is where, you know, he was even expressing outrage over the weekend at the mere fact that nobody had tried to indict James Comey, and that is when his own, one of his personal attorneys, Lindsay Halligan, who had most recently been serving as an aide in this White House, was formally appointed and put in and sworn in as the acting U.S. attorney this Monday here. So the president clearly expressing that he wants action and wants action now, and in his belief that 7 months of this administration has already been too long to wait.
Okay, Vaughn, stick with us because we've got some other stuff to talk about out of the White House, but I want to bring in Greg now to get his legal expertise on all of this. Greg, you have called this case incredibly unprecedented. Explain why it's so significant.
So, I mean, you have an opportunity where the president, the executive branch leader, has now dictated what should be prosecuted and what shouldn't be prosecuted. You've installed the newly installed U.S. attorney into the Eastern District of Virginia, and arguably, based on news reporting, is the one who presented this to the grand jury. I have trained hundreds of prosecutors when it comes to the grand jury. I myself have presented in the grand jury. Not in a million years would I go anywhere near the grand jury without the requisite training, knowledge, and experience. It is a reason why we have an ethical code that we abide by. It is a reason why we train prosecutors the way we do. So these are, from my perspective, stunning developments.
And you mentioned the grand jury, and last night with this new U.S. attorney, the acting U.S. attorney, Lindsay Halligan, she seemed to have some trouble with just the basics in the courtroom last night. The grand jury even choosing not to indict Comey on a third charge, which is rare, especially for a U.S. attorney to go and ask for an indictment in front of a grand jury. How does this bode for the rest of the case going forward with Halligan in charge?
So, I mean, in my new role as a criminal defense attorney, one of the first things that I'm going to assess with my client is whether or not we should be seeking a speedy trial. Under the Speedy Trial Act, you have 70 days until trial. The Eastern District of Virginia, as you probably know, is referred to as the rocket docket. That means that they will likely ask sooner than later. There is a 30-day grace period under the Speedy Trial Act. And so the reality is to answer your question, it doesn't bode well. I have serious concerns as to whether or not this will actually get to a trial, because between the vindictive prosecution claims, selective prosecution claims, and concerns over how exactly this was developed, and the record inside the grand jury, coupled with what you just described, a no true bill from a grand jury, which is rare in and of itself, I don't know who's trying this case.
Yeah. And so explain to me how it won't get to trial. Are you assuming a judge is just going to toss it? How would that work?
So I think what will likely happen is there will be motions practice. And so motions practice will include motions to dismiss based on selective or vindictive prosecution. There will be extensive discovery litigation, even though the body of facts is largely factually known to the public, or at least so we think. There will be discovery practice that relates to how exactly this case was generated. Based upon news reporting, career prosecutors had ethical concerns over the evidence in this case and the intent in this case. And if I were in that position, I would be looking to determine, as a defense attorney, I'd be looking to determine exactly what was presented to the grand jury, what instructions of law were presented to the grand jury, what evidence was, and importantly, was not actually introduced to the grand jury that happens to undercut intent. Because this case rises and falls on intent. That's the whole kit and caboodle.
Yeah. And so let's say it gets tossed from this court. Is that the end of the ball game, or could they go court shopping and perhaps find a judge that might be more willing to look past some of these issues you think might exist in the case?
I mean, I don't know the specifics in terms of the timing, but the statute of limitations is about to run. So it seems likely that the purpose of this was to obtain the indictment in and of itself. I think time will tell. This will be battle tested in court, which is exactly what due process entails. But I have serious concerns about how essentially the development of this case, the evidence in this case. I think you appropriately pointed out that if the grand jury no true billed a earlier count, typically, if that even happens, a prosecutor would go back and try to clean up the indictment to make sure that's what presented is sort of, all four corners squared away. And in this case, you have a reference to person one and person three, but not person two.
Yeah. Okay. Greg, thank you so much for that.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.